This is Rick Rule for Rule Investment Media and the Rule Classroom, sponsors of the 2025 Rule Natural Resources Investment Symposium, July 7 through 11 in Boca Raton, Florida, or via live stream from the comfort and convenience of your own home. However you choose to attend, a couple things you need to know about. First, we're going to give you between 50 and 55 hours of programming over 4 days, more than you can absorb. But we'll make tapes available, recordings of the entire proceeding, so that you can review it for a year, which you will need to do. The second thing is before the symposium, we interview every single public company exhibitor before the conference so that you can familiarize yourselves with the exhibitors before the event. This allows you to allocate your time and, more importantly, perhaps your capital more efficiently. One more thing you need to know. Unlike any other investment conference on the planet, every single exhibitor at our conference is owned in accounts owned and managed by the conference sponsors. This means that every exhibitor at our conference has been vetted. Not to guarantee that every stock I own goes up, but there is a guarantee that every single investment is one that we know well enough that we have invested our own money in that, which allows us to make you an unbelievable guarantee. Unlike any other investment conference on the planet, whether you choose to attend live or via live stream, if you don't believe that you got your money's worth, email us. We'll give you your money back. No financial risk. So, as part of the process, let's get started. Today, I have the pleasure to interview a new friend, new to the conference, Derrick, Pattenden, Chief Investment Officer of Nations Royalty. Note that I am a shareholder of Nations Royalty, and I'm very interested in the whole thesis behind the company, which we're about to share with you. Derrick, first of all, introduce yourself and tell us something about your educational and employment background. In other words, establish the credibility so that people care about the answers that you give to my nosy questions.
Sure. Thanks, Rick. So my name is Derrick Pattenden. I'm the Chief Investment Officer of Nations Royalty. I live in Vancouver now, but I'm from Ontario originally. I'm a member of the Mohawks of the Bay of Quinte First Nation, Tyendinaga. It's about 2 hours east of Toronto, and it's a big part of my passion and for wanting to get involved in this company. And I worked in mining and mine finance my whole life. So my undergrad was mining engineering, and I'm a chartered financial analyst. And I worked 15 years as a mining investment banker at Canaccord Genuity, where I finished up as a director on a banking team there in Vancouver. And over that 15 years was mostly focused on mergers and acquisitions. Got very lucky, probably worked on about over 30 completed M&A deals over that time, a little over $20 billion in equity value, and probably about 15 of that in the gold space. So it was really a M&A focused gold banker. And then also being Mohawk when I first learned about Nations Royalty and this idea of creating Canada's first ever majority Indigenous owned public company, building a mining royalty company that's owned and controlled by Indigenous groups. I just thought it was too tempting of opportunity to not want to get involved in. So I reached out to them literally the day I saw the IPO press release and decided I was going to come work for this company.
So let's summarize that by educational background, both mining and finance. Practical background, worked at what is probably the largest mining-focused investment bank on the planet in valuation and making mining company investments. Also, First Nations background, and we'll learn why that's important to Nations Royalty in just a minute. So tell us what Nations Royalty is. Tell us what the concept is. Tell us what our opportunity as an example, non-Indigenous investors, what our opportunity is and why we should care.
Sure. Well, I mean, we're a publicly traded company, so whether you're Indigenous or not, I mean, our shares are publicly traded and freely available to anyone who wants to own a piece of the company. But what makes us different from, I'd say, every other mining royalty company that's out there today is we are looking at a very different opportunity set from everyone else. We are looking at the royalties that Indigenous groups in Canada can receive through their impact and benefit agreements. So basically, as a mine is advancing on Indigenous territory, it enters a point in time where that miner will enter into an impact benefit agreement or an IBA with the local impacted First Nation. And within that agreement, there's many things that covers, environmental issues, legal issues, but there can be a financial payment in there. And more recently, some of them have started taking the structure of net smelter returns. And so that's obviously a very valuable asset in mining. And so our whole thesis would essentially argue that there are some extremely high quality royalties that are owned by First Nations, and if they pool some of their royalties together, they could make a mining royalty company of their own. And so, to be clear on our opportunity set, is we are not necessarily looking at, say, what is a single asset development stage company that needs construction financing in the next 1 to 2 years. Our opportunity set can be, what are some of the best mines in the country, and let's go talk to those First Nations, right? So it's different.
Derrick, I asked the question in anticipation of maybe more knowledge than our audience has. Last year, people from 33 countries attended the conference via live stream. First Nations, what are First Nations communities? Why does that matter? You know where I'm going with this. And there's all kinds of names that are bantied around: Indian, Indigenous, First Nations. Let's get all this out of the way.
Sure. So the real quick version and the easiest catch-all term would just be Indigenous peoples. And really in Canada, there's 3 subgroups of that. So you have the First Nations, and then you have Métis, and then you have the Inuit. And really, these are the Indigenous peoples of Canada, and often, I'd say most mining projects in Canada are occurring in remote parts of Canada on their territories. And part of the exchange for the consenting to mining activity in their territory is entering into an agreement with them. Because obviously, if you sign an impact and benefit agreement that goes through their chief and council, and it's pretty obvious you've established a relationship there. So much so that the mining company and those Indigenous peoples have actually entered into a pretty substantial agreement with one another. And it's really just it's to help compensate them for risks that they're taking by putting their land, people, and culture on the line by consenting to a large project on their territory.
For our American viewers, the Canadian permitting process is a bit like ours, meaning that there's federal, state, and local jurisdiction. And for mining in remote areas, most usually the most important local jurisdiction is what we would call tribal, or what the Canadians would call First Nations. There is, in some jurisdictions in Canada, British Columbia in particular, likely the de facto right of veto. So the impact benefits agreement is separate and apart from common sense. It's an important part of the legal structure. Is that a relatively accurate summary, Derrick?
Yeah, I'd say so. It's yeah.
So let's talk about what you have, and then we'll talk about what you hope to get. As I understand it, Nations Royalty was formed out of the royalty portfolio of one particular First Nation on ground in northwestern BC that has at least 3 occasionally cooperating, occasionally competing First Nations. Let's talk about what you have now and why that's important.
Sure. So the company was founded in June 2024. That was our IPO. And we, as you mentioned, we founded off a partnership with one First Nation, the Nisga'a Nation from northern British Columbia. And essentially what they did is they had 5 impact and benefit agreement payments. And for them, they chose to vend in 100% of those future impact and benefit agreements into Nations Royalty in exchange for shares. And that's what makes them a 77% owner of our company, and makes us Canada's first and therefore largest majority Indigenous-owned public company. And then those 5 impact benefit agreements, the 5 assets they cover, as the first one is on Bruce Jack, right, a high-grade underground gold mine operated by Newmont. And again, to be clear, all these assets are going to be in northern BC because that's the Nisga'a territory. Then there's 2 assets, the Premier and Red Mountain Mine, which is really one operation that's owned by Ascot Resources. It was briefly in production in 2024. It had a tough 2024. They had to, basically, they were behind an underground development. They had to restructure their debt, restructure their equity, change their management team, and they're currently targeting a restart of that mill in August of 2025. And then the other 2 are, there's an IBA on Kitsault, which is a molybdenum project. It's privately owned. It's owned by New Moly, it's really controlled by Resource Capital Funds. I believe they'll have a feasibility study, a new updated feasibility study coming out soon. What's the start date on that? Is it 2030, 2029? We'll see what it says in that study. And then the most valuable IBA payments in our portfolio right now, for sure, probably around maybe 3/4 of the net asset value in this company, is one on KSM, which is owned by Seabridge Gold. It's just under a couple $2 billion market cap company. And what makes KSM unique is that it is the largest fully permitted but undeveloped gold copper deposit in the world. So in reserves alone, it has over 47 million ounces of gold, over 7 billion pounds of copper. It's an enormous mine, and based on its last technical report, the first 7 years production are scheduled to be about 1.4 million ounces of gold, which would make it, Canada's largest operating gold mine in the country. Currently, that would make it about double the size of, say, Detour or Canadian Malartic, which are kind of neck and neck for the largest operating gold mines in the country today.
And to be clear, you stated it, but let's state it again. The Nisga'a Nation are currently the majority shareholders of Nations Royalty. This is, in fact, an Indigenous controlled public company, correct?
Yes, that is correct.
So, okay, tell us now, that's the base you're building on, all stuff up in the Golden Triangle. Obviously, at least with regards to some of the First Nations, complete alignment. Tell me how you grow. Do you grow by expanding your interest to, as an example, the Shkukamlaksha or the Taltan interest? Do you grow acquiring other interests from other groups? What are you going to do?
Yeah, kind of tying with my history, to be quite blunt, my first day on the job, I'm printing off a chart. What are the 10 largest operating gold mines in the country? Let's go talk to those First Nations, because it's pretty clear that the royalty companies that are gold focused can achieve the higher multiples. And we also kind of want to flex the power of this model by looking at a different opportunity set from everyone else. It would kind of be unheard of for, say, a typical small market cap royalty company to have a target list of looking at, say, gold NSRs on long life operating mines in a safe jurisdiction like Canada. So, that's our primary target list for partnerships. And so we'll be, we're in talks with over 50 different groups right now. And essentially, we'd be approaching these nations to see if they'd be interested in partnering on all or even part of their royalty. Again, the Nisga'a, they did 100%. Doesn't have to be 100%, could just as easily be half or a quarter. Obviously, we'll pay half if it's half. And we're looking to do predominantly share transactions with these Indigenous groups so that they will actually, through a partnership, continue to own their royalty along with, many other royalties, and get all sorts of benefits ranging from, increased diversification, less single asset exposure. They can bring forward a lot of value onto their nation's balance sheets, which there's a lot of access to debt that Indigenous groups can tap into if they do that, because the present value of these payments certainly dwarfs the near-term annual payments. And then lastly is to actually give them a way to tap into these much higher valuations on what these assets are worth when they're put together into a portfolio. Because frankly, some of these payments they're receiving, the best they're going to do right now, receiving the payments 1 year at a time, is 1 times NAV. And it's pretty clear, and there's other recent precedents in Canada out there that some of these NSRs would clearly go above 1 times NAV inside a publicly traded company.
I think that's fairly clear. Now, tell me, given your background in valuation and M&A with Canaccord, tell me how I know as a shareholder that future agreements with future First Nations groups will be accretive to me on a per share basis. What's the acquisition criterion? How do I know that I'm not getting diluted out of existence for some political scheme to enrich First Nations at my expense?
Sure. The first thing is I'm a shareholder as well, right? So really, any transaction I'm looking at, beyond accretion, really what I'd be looking for is, I want a transaction that's going to make the share price go up, where I think the company is stronger and better for having done that. And so I would think about, on some of these, I would think about it as maybe market merger math, where if you take, a 0.3 times NAV company and you do a market merger with something else that was trading at 0.9 times NAV, I would say you could be creating value, even though hypothetically, yes, the NAV per share could go down in that scenario. I think the market would say it's clearly warranted because that other asset is deserving of a higher PNAV multiple, right? Right now our portfolio with KSM, we have a lot in the development stage, and so we have a lower PNAV multiple as a result of that. But some of these assets we're looking at, I truly do believe that there should be a re-rate if we could. The value of these assets should be worth in a publicly traded company. It should be worth a lot more than what it'll be worth to that nation status quo holding it in their own hands. And then I would also say part of our, if you look at our market cap today, that's really the market saying what our portfolio is worth. But I would also argue that would be net of some discounts, like really just a proof of concept discount in this sort of company, right? Like no one's seen this sort of company before. There's literally never been an Indigenous controlled public company. So, right now it'd be a valid question to investors asking, will other nations join this? So we think each time we bring on new partners, that will help remove that discount. And that could be another helpful source of re-rating as we go from, one nation to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5. Obviously, we'd like to get this going to essentially fully remove that discount and show that, yes, nations will do this. And, the company's getting stronger and is better for each one we do. So I hear you. The short answer is, we're shareholders too. And I only want to do a deal if I think the share price is going to go up on the back.
To the audience, I invested because I have a lot of faith in the near-term outlook for the Golden Triangle. I've been close to the tall tens since 1984. That's a very long time now. Haven't known the Nishka as well. But I also look for companies, I like the royalty and streaming model, but I look for companies that have durable competitive advantages in terms of asset acquisition. And I see this personally as a durable competitive advantage. I also know that equity markets reward scale. And if you have a durable competitive advantage in asset acquisition, you have a way to grow and scale and eventually to benefit from passive buying through ETFs. So that was my thesis in a nutshell. Derrick, if people care, and I think they should, about this unique methodology for growing a royalty and streaming business, and they want to reach out and learn more, who do they reach out to specifically, and how do they reach that person?
Sure. Your best point of contact would be myself. I'd be always happy to talk about Nations Royalty. My email is derrick.pattenden@nationsroyalty.ca. So, first dot last name at nationsroyalty.ca. And my phone number is 604-616-5992. And always happy to talk about this company and explain what we're up to, because it's a different take on a traditional model. But speaking to the advantages you mentioned, I mean, one of the biggest challenges for a lot of mining royalty companies is how do you find these high quality assets? The space has been picked at for decades. They're not just lying around, gold NSRs of quality assets all over. But what's unique is in the Indigenous space, there's literally hundreds of millions of dollars of payments from mining companies to Indigenous groups, and there's been one transaction in that space so far. It has been completely untouched and untapped. So we are frankly inundated with an opportunity set. And we're actually, our primary focus is prioritizing these as to which are the ones that we really want to get into the company first.
Ladies and gentlemen, you had the right answer. To learn more, start at the top. He wants to hear from you. You ought to talk to
Absolutely.
him. Derrick, I thank you for your efforts on behalf of shareholders, particularly me. And I thank you, too, for your sponsorship and support of the 2025 Natural Resources Investment Symposium. It'll be a pleasure to host you in Boca.
Looking forward to it.